Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for being here today and joining us. I assume for some of you it's a very busy morning, so really appreciate you spending time here. I am really excited to be speaking on today's topic, which is how to repurpose podcast content with ease with Jane Luna, and she's going to come on screen pretty soon. And we're going to be talking about a very wide, big variety of things around podcast content, and give some insight into how we handle it and some of the planning process and a little bit into the tools that we use. All right, so Jenny, I'm going to introduce you, and while I do that, the decks will come up soon as well. So Jenny is coming in from sunny California. Is it sunny today?
It is.
Okay. All right, it's rainy Michigan today over here. So opposites, but Jenny, pleasure having you. So she is coming from Stanford Graduate School of Business. She is producing, or the executive producer for 4 shows. And the big one today that we'll be focusing on is Think Fast, Talk Smart. But give me 1 second here. Let's bring the slides up. All righty. Okay. All right. There we go. And then let's get into the next slide. Thank you, Josh. So these are 3 of the 4 Think Fast, Talk Smart, and then you have if, then, and then a view from the top. And I didn't even mention this. So executive producer, and her official title is the senior digital content producer there. So Jenny, could you give us a little bit of insight about what you did before Stanford? And then do you want to give a high level view of what each of these shows is about?
Yeah, definitely. Good morning, everyone. Happy to be here. Hi, Robert. So before Stanford Graduate School of Business, I was working in journalism. I had gone to journalism school and was working at a magazine in San Francisco, and they were starting a new food politics podcast. So I had not ever worked in higher ed before Stanford, but coming from a journalism background, I felt like I could really come into higher ed and know how to tell a good story and know how audio worked. I knew about podcasting, and then I could bring it to higher ed where podcasting was sort of just getting off of the ground. So we have a few shows. The very first show we started was, and maybe some folks in the audience do this, we turned a live event series that was already being recorded into a podcast, and that's called View from the Top. Then we decided we wanted to make some original content, and so a colleague of mine said, this one lecturer, he does communication, people love his stuff, you should start a podcast with him. So I invited Matt Abrahams to coffee. I said, do you want to start a podcast? He said, yes, but what's a podcast? That was in 2019. In March of 2020, he called me and he said, I know we only have 5 episodes out, but I can keep doing this from my house. My teenage son will help me. That's sort of the early stages of Think Fast, Talk Smart. And now it's quite a big show, which has been shocking to all of us. Sometimes it can even be challenging to keep supporting it, but it's a ton of fun to work on. It's a weekly show all about communication. And given the success of that podcast, we also wanted to make a flagship show that really represented all the research coming out of Stanford Graduate School of Business. So earlier this year, we launched If Then. Each episode focuses on a different area of research. And while that may not reach as broad of an audience as Think Fast, Talk Smart does, it really helps us meet a lot more institutional goals. It makes faculty happy, and we can really get the word out about the management science that's happening at the school.
Fantastic. So lots of work they're doing over at Stanford, lots of great content coming out. And just through what you're describing, Jenny, so a mix of research, a mix of working with faculty, a mix of guests coming on campus. So all right, and really quickly, do you want to just say some quick high-level stats for the Think Fast, Talk Smart listenership? I'm just asking, it's a pretty big show.
Yeah, so, I do remember the day we hit 1,000 listens, and it just felt amazing. Like, there are actually 1,000 people listening to this podcast, and now we have almost 2 million monthly listeners, and I've stopped counting in terms of total listens / downloads, but pretty amazing, because even though we do see these really high numbers on our back end of, both across our YouTube and in the podcast channel of, we're having thousands of people listening every second, we're still getting these emails from individual people all over the world that write about how much the show has really helped them negotiate for a raise or, talk with their spouse better. And so, in the one hand, we have these huge numbers, which is so fun to look at, but then we also get these anecdotal responses from our audience, and that sometimes can feel just as good as a big number.
No, it's really wonderful. And the conversation we're about to have today, I think a big part of why this trip has grown so well is the engagement with the community and just all the marketing around the podcast. So it's the content plus the promotion piece. So with that, let's get into our agenda for today. So we've broken out this conversation about repurposing content to three sections. First is repurposing for social media. And the second is talking about more the show catalog. So your new episodes and also your old episodes, how to reuse them for new content without having to do new interviews. And then lastly, the special events piece, kind of the online, remote, and in-person events tied related to the podcast and how to leverage that attention back to listenership. As we go along today, as with all our other sessions, feel free to pop a question in chat at any moment. We'll just answer them as we go along. Jenny is full of knowledge, and I'm here to provide some input too. So any questions you have, happy to help. So with that, let's get started with social media.
I have pretty different views actually than Robert when it comes to social media, and I think both approaches can work really well. So I'm actually going to ask Robert one of the first questions, which is how his team does social media. We do collaborate on one show, and I'm always impressed by such a clean process and sort of package that happens with each episode. So I think we're both going to share our sometimes differing approaches to social.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Jenny. So the show that we work together with Stanford on is called All Else Equal. And Josh, if you help go to the next slide here, want to give an overview of the different types of social media assets that exist. So on this, what you're seeing right now, there's social cards, audiograms, carousel posts, short clips, and full videos. Typically a high level in our production flow after the recording is done and after the interview is done and we have the recordings, then we move everything into post-production process where all these assets you see on the page are kind of made concurrently. For some folks who may not be aware of what these specific types of formats are, so a social card is what you see there in the top left is more of like a quote card. Audiogram is similar, but it is an actual playable clip, playable audio clip that will go along, as it goes. The transcript or the caption subtitles will display. Carousel posts. So this is an example from LinkedIn, but also you have examples on your Instagram carousel posts. Short video clips, that's your IG Reels, your YouTube Shorts, really video clips that are less than a minute for most platforms. And I think for some, less than 3 minutes. And then you have your full videos. From previous conversations, mentioned before, videos, pretty important part of our social media strategy. Just, all of this in an effort to get the podcast from more people and meet them where they are. All right. So for us, when we approach social media, we're kind of thinking about who are we reaching with it. And the way that most social media platforms are built, how the recommendation algorithms are built, a lot of the social card, audiogram type of things would primarily be viewed by people who are already following the show or already following the social accounts. And we've seen that for attracting more newer followers, we're going heavier on the short video clip strategy because those are promoted and pushed more to people who are not currently following our accounts. And this variety of posts, I think I'll also add that the carousels do really well and the short video clips do really well in terms of engagement. And I just think part of that's because they're a little more of a more fresher approach than the typical posts you would see on social. All right. Um, Jenny, uh, from a Think Fast, Talk Smart perspective, I
Yeah.
think you guys also do these.
So our social media strategy sort of has worked backward. I feel like a lot of times we are putting things on social media to drive traffic to a podcast, but actually we built the podcast audience first and then decided to give the audience we already had social content that builds upon what they're doing. So we did start with posts about each episode. Go listen to the new episode, go listen to the new episode. But we actually find that that doesn't work very well because they already are listening to the episode. So they're already subscribed, they're already into the show. They don't need a reminder. So we've been trying to like make supplemental things or add-ons that we have. The host for Think Fast Talk Smart has a lot of great sort of tips and techniques. So we've often just break those down into a short form video and put that on social media. It's a little more ad hoc. So that can be at once nice because it can often be a little less work, but also it doesn't have sort of the structure and the process that most social media strategies have. If we could go to the next slide,
Yeah.
I'll give you an example of something we've tried. This one with the cartoon. So we had a listener who was actually drawing cartoons and posting them on LinkedIn and tagging Matt. And we saw their posts and we reached out to them directly and said, we love how you're turning these learnings into such a visual format. Would you be willing to make some for the show? As you guys know, higher ed, it's not like we have tons of resources to hire illustrators and designers and engineers and videographers. So we are often sort of reaching back into our audience when we see them engage with us and asking for things in return, which has been pretty successful for us. So again, this post was someone making cartoons. We reached out and then they started making things for us, which was pretty cool. And again, we're really trying to add to a podcast episode that already exists rather than just promote the podcast episode itself.
Yeah. How tell me more about the non-podcast videos they're gonna write. So like these ad hoc, short clips. What's the planning process that goes behind those? How do you get Matt, professor with a busy schedule in front of a camera? How's he know what to talk about? Yeah.
Well, I will preface everything with saying that Matt Abrahams is always game to experiment and always down to try new things, and he performed really well in front of a camera. So while I wish we could say we had a really buttoned up process, we often, because again, we don't have a video studio, anytime we have access to a video studio, we may be visiting one, we may be doing one interview across campus at Stanford Video, we will tack on all these little things. And as I mentioned, Matt has all these tools and techniques sort of already in his tool belt, I guess. So I can sort of put the camera on and say, let's do a 3-minute video on introductions. Okay, can you do a 1-minute take on how to handle dissenting opinions in front of a live audience? And he really has practiced these things. Being a teacher, professors are so good at speaking in front of people. So being a teacher, he really has these nailed down. And so we just create them whenever we have access to a camera, to be honest, and then we'll put, sort of leak them onto social once a week or twice a month.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is partly you'll be efficient with a batch recording process. So yeah, whenever you do have the opportunity with the camera, you're recording multiple pieces of content at once. And the second thing I'm hearing that's really important is just Matt's involvement as a host.
Definitely. I like to say, and I've told you this before, Robert, in sessions, is Matt is often half producer and full host. So really having him on board and actively brainstorming versus he just shows up and I tell him what to say. That's how some hosts operate on podcasts, but Matt is extremely involved. And I think that partnership from day one has been really crucial.
Yeah. In the process of recording more and more of these like shorter clips that are completely separate from the podcast interviews, what were some things that are a little rough at the beginning that you think have gotten better over time?
That's a great question. Again, going back to resources, we don't necessarily have really talented videographers, and we're sort of learning as we go when we're playing with things like video. So getting Matt to do it in one take because we don't want to do a ton of editing has
Yeah.
been challenging. And then also, as you can see in that, it has the nice logo in the bottom. He's in front of a nice red screen. So some things we really had to learn along the way that we had input from Stanford's design team was, you can't just stand in front of an ugly background. All these little things that really helped with the brand of the show, add the logo, maybe add a quick opening card that we sort of had to figure out how to do in-house, but really upped the level. I think we'll show example later of something that is more of that like garage style
Mm-hmm.
video. So while I don't think one is the way to go, I think having a good mix. So you don't always look like you're just filming in your home office, but you also don't look so buttoned up that someone thinks, oh, this is high academic stuff and it's not for me.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So it sounds like over time, build some templates and some guidelines for how to do it. All right.
Yeah.
So this is more the ad hoc approach. So in the next slide, I'm going to talk about a very much structured approach that we take to it. Um, this is a very high level view of our tool workflow for social media. So starting at the top with Riverside, which is what we use to record our remote interviews, and then this guest release form. So a few important notes for Riverside: we use this tool because we like to have the audio tracks for each individual separately, so that it makes it easier for editing. What that means is if you have two guests together, they're not all recorded on one microphone. They're recorded on two separate microphones, right? And also record two separate like audio file tracks. And then the other piece here is, generally speaking, like a guest release form. So this is where the text is a little small, but this is where we ask for some very essential basic information to help with our social media. Like, okay, how would you like your name listed, your title, your institution? And also at the end of this, could you add in or upload a picture of yourself, a headshot of yourself that we can use for social media, rather than having to go Google Images and maybe find an image that they're not by themselves, or it's just really low quality, or they're with a buddy and they have their arms around that buddy. You don't want that happening. So that's kind of the upfront of getting all the like raw assets. And in terms of the tools we use for the post-production process, is a combination primarily of Canva, Headliner, and Descript. Canva, I assume most people know by now, but it's a really wonderful collaborative visual editing tool. Headliner is specifically for your audiograms and short videos. And then Descript is kind of like a full post-production tool that you could make your audiograms in, your social cards, your short videos. So all this together is our tool workflow. Now, I'm not going to spend the today's session like giving like a demo of each tool, but if you have questions about that, feel free to ask, and I can give some resources, and maybe down the line do another session specifically on how to use these tools.
I've got a question for you, Robert.
Okay.
So I know there's free versions of a lot of these, but the paid version is always so much better. So if you had to choose only one or two of these tools, which would you pick?
I'd say if I was to choose two, choose Canva and Descript. I think Canva free version even is really good for setting up some basic design templates, like even for your show artwork, things like that. And then Descript, I think, is really good, like full service tool that could handle the Headliner, what Headliner does. And to my knowledge, they have a free version where you have up to like maybe 5 hours of audio uploads a month, and that's totally enough to start testing things out. So that's where I would start, Canva and Descript. Thanks for the question. All right, so next let's move past social media into the show catalog. So the context for this, first I want to start talking about the long tail effect on podcast downloads. And what I mean with that will become more clear here on this graph. So this is a graph of downloads by days from one of our shows. I've highlighted like 3 different red boxes here to point out that in the first box, this is a break period, like a 1 month plus break period where there were no new episodes being published. The second box is when there was an episode published each week, and typically there's a every other week type of show. That's during the Christmas break, and Christmas break we had 2 like rerun episodes and a new episode. And then the last box there is more recently, just what happens where maybe you're like 2 or 3 days, 2 days, I guess, behind or 2 days late on publishing an episode. Big picture is that for podcasts listenership growth, for download growth, one of the base requirements is that you're very consistent with your publishing frequency. You can see, just comparing these boxes, yeah, we're not publishing anything new. It's rare for those those spikes to come up. And when you do more frequent publishing, depending on, even if they're reruns, that could really help boost your downloads as a reminder for people to listen, or maybe they're on break themselves and catch up with old episodes. So we're thinking about show catalog. It's well understood that the majority of downloads from an episode come up front in the first 7 days, first 30 days, and then it kind of drops off. But for a lot of shows, our content is evergreen. For a lot of shows, it's not news oriented topics, or it doesn't have to be like that topical. So how can we look at our old content and repurpose them in new formats, new ways to make them relevant again? And the first example we're going to be talking about is on the next slide. A great example from Think Fast, Talk Smart about repurposing multiple clips from old interviews into this sort of mashup episode. So Jenny, I'll let you kind of describe this episode, and then we're going to play a clip from it.
Great. I'm going to preface this with a quick story. Just that, I think it was 2 summers ago, it was 4th of July, and we all said as a team, well, we're all going to be offline. No one's going to be working. Let's just, and probably no one's going to be listening to podcasts. Let's just take a week off and not run anything for that week. And we actually saw such a dip in listens from just missing 1 week that we decided that Christmas break, when we also usually took a break, we were going to put out content to make sure that didn't happen. So that was sort of the impetus for this ABCs episode that we had, because even though our web team isn't there, even though our social team isn't there, we still had to schedule something, because those of you who produce a podcast know, it's feeding a beast. So in the beginning of December, we started planning for this show. And what we decided to do is just take 7 or 8 shows that were about a similar topic, pull out different quotes, and then we had Matt narrate in between those quotes or learnings, and we put it into one episode, and it actually ended up being one of our top performing episodes of the year, even though it was published at the tail end of the year. So it did really, really well.
Yeah. It just emphasizes that point even more. Oftentimes for like the entire podcast industry, all shows typically show a dip during that Christmas break period. So the fact that this really was a spike is really impressive. So we have a short clip here that we're going to play for you, which is Matt making introduction.
Confident communication boils down to a simple equation. Confidence equals competence. The more confident you are, the more competent and credible your audience will see you as. Of course, you can take this to an extreme, and I am certainly not suggesting that we all be overconfident or arrogant when we interact with others. Believe me, I work and teach in Silicon Valley, and I spend a lot of time talking about confidence versus arrogance. Now, the biggest barrier to confident communication is anxiety. Most people, upwards of 75% of people, feel anxious in high-stakes communication situations, be it written or spoken, in-person or virtual, with large audiences or small, synchronous or asynchronous. I think I covered all the bases there. Today, with the help of clips from experts from previous Think Fast, Talk Smart episodes, I hope to provide you with several communication anxiety management techniques to help you feel more comfortable and confident when you communicate.
All right. So I think that was personally also a quick note. That was a wonderful opening to the episode, provide a lot of context for the structure for what listeners should be expecting from it. And as Jenny mentioned, as you listen more to this particular episode, the edits in between or the voiceovers that Matt did really flowed nicely from one clip to the other clip. Jenny, when you were producing this episode, what how did you make the process a little easier on yourself, or maybe another way of asking that question, if you're to do this type of format again, how would you make it easier for yourself?
Let's see, if we hadn't have had transcripts for every single episode, I would have said it would be nearly impossible.
Mm.
So the very baseline thing is that Matt and I have been consistently working together since 2020. So we have the knowledge of guest and title and theme. It can be challenging when we bring new people in because we remember old episodes, we remember old guests, and it's all sort of located in our brain. So that's sort of step one. Step two is having a transcript of all of them. And then step three is we've just moved our whole production system into Airtable, which allows you to tag. So now every time in production that we have an episode, we tag it. So all of these were actually tagged as anxiety as being a theme, anxiety management. We have things like conflict resolution, negotiation, anything that sort of touches on communication. So that way we can go into our Airtable software and search from tag and then see which episodes we have to pull from that all talk about creativity or forgiveness or what have you. So then having the transcript was really crucial because we could go in and pick the quote. Now, something we worked into our process since doing this episode is sort of when we are actually in production for every individual episode, already working on that. Instead of having to go back to episodes, we now will highlight a paragraph or an answer from a guest that we know can serve us really well for a future episode. So like this one answer really encapsulates the best thing. This is the best bumper sticker answer. This is the best highlight or takeaway. And we can highlight that in the transcript. So that way, next time when we go to make a longer episode, it's already pointed out. Kind of like, remember when we used to actually put little sticky notes in our books with like a highlighter? It's like old school version, new school version of that.
Yeah, new school version of that, or even the dog ears. Okay, that is so. From what I'm hearing, it's a lot in the pre-planning process, right? Before you even start editing, you're keeping track of the different tags between episode quotes. Identifying larger themes that could come together into a mashup episode.
Yeah. And I would say, while this episode saved us time because we weren't interfacing with a guest, it was more work in different ways because it's a lot more editing. Right now, Think Fast, Talk Smart standard episode is just an interview that we cut down. This involves an engineer picking and pulling from 7 different episodes, plus writing that script for Matt to read that goes in and out of each clip. So production wise, it can be a bit heavier of a lift, but as you see with the numbers, I think it was definitely worth it.
Yeah. And even I'll just make a note here, because when you were writing out the script for Matt, I'm sure you just recorded it all in one go. Yeah. Another thought here is mashup episodes like this provide a great opportunity to make callbacks or throwback posts to these particular episodes that's pulling from. So you can see the timestamps here. You have about 8 different episodes are being featured. So to post one mashup, fantastic. That's a great reason to reshare the old episodes. Alrighty. Let's go to the next slide here, which is also about show catalog, but some other ways to kind of fill in those break periods of not recording new content. So Jenny, can you talk a little bit about this concept of feed drops?
Yeah, so this really applies actually not to Think Fast, Talk Smart, but this other podcast I was talking about called If Then, that interviews faculty from across the school. So everyone's going to go on vacation this summer, and we aren't allowed to bother faculty trying to get them to do interviews and episodes. So we're going to have to figure out how to really fill that content, or as I say, like keep the podcast feed warm. And so a way that we're going to go about that is finding other shows across campus that have similar audiences, and then basically just publishing their wave file. They're going to give us a wave file. We have our host come on for 20 seconds to say, while If Then is on a summer break, we're happy to share this episode with Russ Altman from The Future of Everything, produced out of the School of Engineering. Maybe that episode also features a faculty member from the business school. We try to get it to align as much with the messaging, the audience, and the topics that it can, but it's a really good way to help us, as I said, keep the feed warm over the summer.
Yeah. And then one more point about episode planning. So this one's a part 1, part 2 series. So this idea is interesting. If you have a longer recording, then yeah, sometimes it does make sense to break it up into 2 different parts that are released, sequentially.
Yeah, we've been working with Spotify. We're part of a preferred partners program with them, and this is something we never thought to do, but they actually asked us to do, because they said if someone logs into a feed and they see there's a part 2, they will listen to a part 1. So it's actually something that we've really worked in as much as we can. Is, okay, Matt wants to interview someone about let's say giving a eulogy at a funeral. Can we also pair that with how to write an obituary? I just made that up, but we're trying to think of every episode, or as many as we can, having multiple parts in it, so that people keep tuning back to hear, this little mini series, if you will.
Interesting. I'm curious, was there any guidance from them about, you can publish it 1 week after, or hey, it's better to publish like a day later or the same time?
Yeah, we've experimented with both. We try a lot of Tuesday, Thursday. Tuesday's our regular day. We publish every Tuesday. So then if we added something Thursday, would that be good? And actually, we saw a dip. We did not see the same people come back on Thursday. So we found best success just sticking to Tuesday. Part 1 comes out on Tuesday. Part 2 comes out the next.
Interesting. It's like a different type of expectation setting for when episodes come out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
It's such an intimate, audio is so intimate. They feel like they know you, you're in their ears. And so I think there's such a relationship. And so it's almost like you're doing something they don't expect, or that's outside of the norm of this relationship you've cultivated. It's like, wait, no, Matt Abrahams is my Tuesday commute guy. I can't listen to him on Thursday. I listen to Dak Shepard or something like that. That's how I feel like it is. They feel so close to us that we want to just really earn their trust and not stray too far from what their expectation is of us.
Sure. All right. So that's good on show catalog. Let's move on to the last section here, which is about special events.
Yeah. This one, I think I mentioned it earlier about really leveraging what you can. So a lot of times the business school will host events, maybe for alumni, maybe for online program participants. And it's really too much for our small podcast team, which is me and Matt, to put on a large event. But what we found success is really piggybacking off an event that's already happening. And we help them by offering to do a session about communication in business that helps them sort of fill their agenda. And then they will have them, they're going to have it recorded, and they're going to have photographers just because they're the event staff, and they'll have those things. And then we in turn have asked them for those assets for us to share on social media. So it's been a really good way to partner with the events team on campus in order to help them fill their agenda, and then help us get content for posts or for episodes themselves.
When you're working with the events team, what's kind of the behind the scenes prep work that happens? What do you need to provide them before the day of?
That's a great question. We always give them theme music, because we want the theme music to be playing as Matt and I walk on stage. We have a lot of art, like a big logo that they can usually, there's usually a PowerPoint that we'll put up. Sometimes Matt will have a few slides, but usually not more than 3. And something we've actually just started doing at live events, which to me at first felt gimmicky, but Matt loved it and our audience ended up loving it, is he forces people to take out their phones and go subscribe, like, share, do all, give us a 5-star rating. And he does that on stage. And there may only be like 40 people in the audience, but sometimes there's 600 people in the audience. And that's been a really fun way. He's like, all right, guys, this is gimmicky. I'm corny. Get out your phones, go rate, review. And it's been actually really successful. I think people like feeling involved in that way.
Let's see. Okay. That's definitely good, out of the comfort zone of some people, but hey, that is useful. It works, right?
Yeah.
And looking at these posts, I was going to make a quick comment. So the screenshots on here are the LinkedIn posts from the events. Generally speaking, in terms of community engagement, social media engagement, posting things with people's faces, or like these in-person events always has a higher engagement, I feel like, than your typical like headshot post, right, of somebody. So, all right, that's fantastic. And now let's move on to the remote event aspect. So I think this is something pretty special for, I think, Fast Like Smart, definitely, in the like a higher ed space. And Josh, if you could go to the next slide here, in the higher ed space, it doesn't happen that often. I think part of it, Think Fast Like Smart has grown this following to such a level where you have international audiences from all around, and they listen to the show for different reasons. I know, one of the big reasons is they listen just to practice their own English, right? Listening and speaking ability. And I found it amazing, again, with this heavy host involvement from Matt, he's so willing and open to hosting live sessions where they're kind of functioning as Q&As, right? So could you talk a little bit about how the first Think Fast, Talk Smart Live idea came about, and what's the work that's required to put something like that together?
Yeah, these, while it felt like a really big lift at first, these have become really easy and really great ways to engage with our audience and then get a great episode out of it. And I like these because we actually don't have a guest, and it's just Matt talking. And again, professors who have podcasts, they're used to teaching. They're used to speaking in front of people. They all probably taught during COVID. So they're also really good at teaching over Zoom, hosting webinars. So Matt had a webinar for something else. And then we said, well, why don't we do a webinar for our audience? And actually, the reason behind everything was that we wanted email addresses, because they had to give their email to sign up for the webinar. And that was actually how we started our newsletter. Was we offered a webinar, got their email addresses, had the event, and then we used it to promote, push, and start a brand new newsletter. We do 2 time zones because we have a global reach, and the big offering is that people are getting a Stanford teaching or a Stanford class, Stanford education for free. So they can log on to the webinar, and then Matt is sharing sort of a new learning he has, a new framework, a new communication technique that he shares with the audience. So at first we were nervous maybe not having a guest wouldn't be as successful, but these events are really where we learned people are logging on for Matt, to hear from Matt, to learn from Matt. Something that we also love is we ask people to come off mute and ask questions. And then that has provided so much more content, because then we have recordings of people from all over the world with all different accents saying where they're tuning in from, asking Matt a question, Matt answering in real time. And then that can become its own social post or its own short clip. And that's been a really fun way to repurpose content as well. And then the one on the right is actually a little video of Matt just giving thanks to the audience. Thank you for listening. I think we framed it around Thanksgiving, a day of gratitude. But then at the very bottom, we're also saying, oh, and don't forget to sign up for our webinar, which is sort of what we always try to do with Think Fast, Talk Smart, is lead with gratitude and then include an ask, or lead with a learning that we're giving and then include an ask. So I think we're always give first and sort of accept or take second.
I love how you guys approach it at lead while learning first. And even with the Q&A format, it's not just, okay, ask me questions, or you guys have a initial starting lessons to provide others first. What tool do you use for those live sessions?
We actually just use Zoom, and it's been pretty easy. The one thing that we are doing behind the scenes is we're having people put their questions in the Zoom chat, and then me and another producer are copy and pasting all those questions into a Google Doc. And then we are highlighting in real time while Matt's sort of answering questions or doing the lesson, which questions we want asked. So we make sure that we're getting a variety of locations from different callers. We're getting a variety of different questions we know that Matt can answer and the audience will be interested in. And then we message that person privately in the Zoom webinar and we say, hey, Robert, you're up next. Make sure when we call on you to come off mute. And then we message Matt, hey, Matt, the next person you're going to call on is named Robert. And then that has sort of worked out the kinks of Matt calls on them, they come off mute, they ask their question, he answers, and then we do another question pretty quickly.
That seems pretty seamless. That's a very good approach.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite events because again, when we put out episodes, we hear, the numbers tick, 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 tick up and it's really exciting. But then when you see people log in and then they come off mute and they say, oh my gosh, Matt, I just love your show so much. And it's so great to be here. It gives me the chills talking about it. We're really helping people. And when they log on and they just have so much enthusiasm and they're so excited to be there, we realize all these numbers, they all correlate with real people out there who are tuning in every week.
Yeah, it just makes them more real.
Yeah.
Another quick note, I love how you took these events as the stepping stone to get into the newsletter. That's a really smart approach, because oftentimes I think it's the other way around. You're trying to somehow build up your newsletter following and then you announce the events coming up. But I feel like this would be more effective taking it this way. All right. So with that, we're going to go to the very last slide here. If you have any questions, feel free to raise a hand or put them in chat. But that is the conclusion of today's session on repurposing content. So here is Jenny and my contact information. And if you want some more podcasting resources, there's a link right there underneath the QR code. And that QR code is a link to listen to Think Fast, Talk Smart and other Jenny's other podcasts. And then some podcasts, guidebooks, the We're on Campus podcast, which is a show all about podcasting in a higher ed context. And yeah, next session will be on the podcast production flow. So it's going to be scheduled soon. But if you have any other, ideas or things you want to learn about podcasting, feel free to suggest them. And it's very likely that we'll have a session about it. So, okay. I don't see any questions so far. I think we're good. Jenny, any last words?
Know your audience. That's the number one piece of advice we hear from guests. So even when you're making your podcast, know who your audience is. And I think that's sort of become my takeaway from the podcast and with everything I do.
Fantastic.
This has been a lot of fun. Thank you for having me, Robert.
Thank you, Jenny. This is amazing. Every time I see you, it's always a great day, and happy to end kind of work week on this. So thanks again, Jenny. And thank you everybody for tuning in. All right. See ya.
Bye.